What is up, RotoBallers? I'm Pierre, the Roto Chef, here once again to help you set your lineups for Week 11. This time we're going to talk about running backs, some guys I think are must starts, and a couple that you should be sitting based on matchups. Before we finish, don't forget to hit the subscribe button because we have plenty of content by guys, not just myself, but all week long, all season long to help you win, set those winning lineups. It's almost playoff time, so you want to go in strong. So don't forget to check out, of course, rotoballer.com. We always have constantly updated rankings, the latest news, everything you need. All right, so let's get to the running backs. Let's start with David Montgomery. Easy to forget about a guy coming off the bye week. The Bears were off in week 10. And if you look back at week 9, the last game that he played, and also his first game back from IR, so not too impressive. He only carried the ball 13 times for 63 yards. And so there's a lot of people who are kind of worried, is he going to get back to his usual workload? Because Khalil Herbert, those couple games in relief, looked really good. And so we thought, well, maybe they're going to try to keep him fresh. Maybe Herbert's earned some more touches. Well, more important than Montgomery's stat line, which again wasn't that great this last game that he played before the bye, is Herbert's the fact that he only got 4 carries that game. So this is not a 1A, 1B situation. Montgomery is still the guy there. He's going to be the number one clear RB1 on a team that is still one of the most run heavy in the league. So nothing to worry about with that. And then talk about the matchup. You look at Baltimore. Historically, you think that's a tough defense. Not this year. You've probably seen the stats. As long as John Harbaugh has been the coach, which has been a while there in Baltimore, this is one of the worst defenses statistically that he's put up. And as far as just rush defense, they're only 15th in rushing DVOA. That's defense adjusted value over average. So not anything to really worry about. As far as in the passing game too, Montgomery's going to be the guy involved. There's nobody else they're going to bring in as a third down back necessarily. It's going to be Montgomery. Herbert will be sprinkled in there a little bit, but again, Montgomery is kind of back to being a set and forget RB2, and this week is no exception. All right, what about Myles Gaskin? He's never set and forget. He's a guy that we never know what to expect from. Thought he would be kind of one of those bargain RB2s all year because there's really just not a lot of depth behind him. He is a good receiver out of the backfield. The Dolphins just haven't been a good offense. And so it's hard to know what to expect. He hasn't had really that many boom games. But the good news is they do play the Jets twice a year, being in the AFC East, and this happens to be one of those weeks. So for Week 11, you kind of have to start Gaskin because the Jets defense, yes, they are really that bad, both against the pass and against the run. And Gaskin, again, kind of does a little bit of each. So as far as just running the ball, and Gaskin, again, not going to get a ton of carries because this isn't a run-heavy offense because they can't afford to be without an offensive line. But still, Gaskin has the upside because he's going to get the most carries. I figure at least 15, unless the game happens to get away with him, God forbid. But just in the last 4 weeks, the Jets defense has given up 14 touchdowns to running backs alone. Okay, I'm not talking about the whole season. Let that sink in. Just in the last 4 weeks, the Jets have given up 14 touchdowns just to running backs. Of course, they're giving up the most fantasy points to running backs as well, and the second most yards per carry. So just based on rushing ability, Gaskin is a guy you should start. Then you add in the fact that he's a receiver as well out of the backfield. Malcolm Brown is still out. Will Fuller still out. Devontae Parker. All these guys are on IR. They need Gaskin because they just don't have a lot of weapons. Against the Jets, you absolutely have to keep him in there somehow, some way. And then what about D'Ernest Johnson? I think, well, isn't Nick Chubb coming back? Probably. But you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say that even if Nick Chubb is back, which he should be for this game, you still start D'Ernest Johnson. So we know Kareem Hunt obviously has value even with Chubb in there, that 1-2 punch. No, D'Ernest Johnson isn't quite Kareem Hunt, although he did put up some good numbers, when he had the backfield to himself. It's not going to be the same. I'm not saying it is, but Johnson is a guy that we've seen going to get involved. Even the last game he played with Chubb, where Hunt was out, but it was Chubb and Johnson, he got 8 carries. He didn't do a lot with them, granted, but he's still going to get some carries. He'll still get a couple of catches. And most of all, this is Detroit. Okay, Detroit is on the schedule. I know Cleveland looked miserable last week without Odell Beckham. But you know what? They're going to bounce back. The good teams usually do. This offensive line is too good and too proud to not put up some points, especially against Detroit. I think Johnson is going to be kind of a sneaky start because when Chubb comes back, people are going to start fading him and benching him. I think in a PPR league, you can still start him. He always has touchdown upside, so against Detroit, it's hard to say must start if you have a guy who happens to be a locked-in RB2, but at that point, you don't really need to worry about who to start anyways. And there's just not that many guys at running back that you can trust these days. So I do like Johnson as a start this week. Now, Zach Moss had been one of those guys you thought could kind of fit that mold as you start, and the ceiling isn't super high, but at least you're getting some points, right? He had that streak where he's getting double-digit points in PPR leagues because he catches a few passes, he's on his great offense, and those things are still true. But here's the thing. Now we see Matt Breida's getting involved, right? Because Moss was out and Breida had to get involved. And last week, he looked just as good as Jack Moss. In fact, better than both him and Singletary. Devin Singletary is still there to take some touches. The fact is, this will never be any one running back's backfield. And whichever the running back is, they're still going to cede some carries, especially in the goal line, to Josh Allen. So the ceiling not only isn't super high, now all of a sudden the floor is a lot lower for Moss because of the time he missed. He might be losing a little bit of work to this committee. And this is a bad matchup because Indianapolis, well, they are a pretty good run defense, top 5 in terms of limiting fantasy points. So I just don't think the volume, plus the negative matchup is enough to make Moss startable. So he's really relying on a touchdown here. And yeah, it was easy to score bunches against the Jets. It will not be easy against Indy. I kind of feel like this might be a low-scoring game, actually. And then last but not least, Jordan Howard. Well, he all of a sudden looked like he was startable, and he's been pretty solid even without a ton of touches because Philly's all of a sudden able to run the ball and willing to run the ball, and they've been doing it effectively. We've seen Howard not only getting 70, 80 yards on the ground, but then scoring touchdowns. 3 touchdowns the first 2 games where he was active. So all of a sudden Howard is somebody who was fantasy relevant. That's going to stop now because here's the problem with Howard. Does not have a high floor. Without those touchdowns, he just doesn't have enough to carry him because he doesn't catch a single pass at all. Hasn't caught a single pass this year, and we know that because his hands are made of stone. He will not get thrown the ball at all. So there's no receptions there, again, focusing mainly on PPR leagues. But there's no catches to talk about. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's relying just on yardage. Well, here's the problem going against New Orleans. New Orleans still the best run defense in the league, averaging less than 3 yards per carry allowed to running backs, 2.7 yards per carry. So if you think about how many touches Howard would need to get to even have a decent fantasy day, it's not going to happen, right? He will not get 20, 25 carries. Never, even if they're winning big, because they still have Boston Scott, Gainwell, and Hurts will run it. So in other words, you're really just depending on a touchdown for Howard. Even if he does score a touchdown, if he gets you 40, 50 yards, which he might be lucky to this game, you're barely talking about a double-digit output. So the upside is just very low, and the floor is almost nothing. So Howard is definitely a guy that, even though he's been startable the last couple of weeks, I think you have to keep him benched this week. And that actually goes for Boston Scott as well. All right, those are my running backs I like and don't for week 11. Let us know what you think. If you appreciate this content, hit that thumbs up and let us know. All right, thanks.